At dawn over the Pacific, American pilots were about to face an enemy aircraft so dominant that it had already rewritten the rules of aerial warfare. The Mitsubishi A6M Zero was not just a fighter, it was a symbol of Japanese superiority, speed, and reach. And in the opening months of World War II, it ruled the sky without challenge. When the Zero first appeared in combat in 1940 over China, its performance shocked observers. It climbed faster, turned tighter, and flew farther than anything its opponents could field. By the time Japan launched its attacks across the Pacific, the Zero was already a proven killer. On December 7, 1941, American forces encountered the Zero under the worst possible conditions. Pearl Harbor burned while Japanese pilots demonstrated total air dominance. American aircraft were destroyed on the ground, and those that managed to take off were hopelessly outmatched in the air. The Zero's success was not accidental. It was the result of a ruthless design philosophy. Japanese engineers sacrificed armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, and pilot protection to achieve unmatched agility and range. In the early war, those choices paid off with devastating efficiency. American pilots quickly learned that traditional dogfighting meant death. The Zero could outturn every U.S. fighter in service. Pilots who tried to match it in a turning battle rarely survived. Fear spread fast, carried by combat reports and empty seats in briefing rooms. Across the Pacific, morale was shaken. The United States Navy and Army Air Forces faced an enemy that seemed untouchable. Every engagement reinforced the same conclusion. America was flying yesterday's aircraft into tomorrow's war. Yet even in defeat, American commanders were watching, learning, and adapting. They began to understand that the Zero's strengths hid fatal weaknesses. The question was not whether the Zero could be beaten, but how quickly America could learn to do it. The race to reclaim the sky had begun, and it would demand innovation, sacrifice, and a complete rejection of old assumptions. What followed would change air combat forever. In the months that followed Pearl Harbor, the Zero carved a reputation that bordered on myth. From the Philippines to the Dutch East Indies, Japanese pilots dominated the air with an ease that stunned Allied forces. Reports described an aircraft that could appear suddenly, strike with precision, and vanish before retaliation was possible. American and Allied pilots faced an enemy trained to an exceptional standard. Many Zero pilots were combat veterans from China, disciplined, confident, and deadly. Their tactics emphasized teamwork, situational awareness, and aggressive maneuvering, turning every encounter into a calculated hunt. The Zero's range expanded Japan's reach across the Pacific. It could escort bombers deep into enemy territory, something Allied fighters could not match at the time. This ability allowed Japanese forces to strike far beyond expectations, collapsing defenses that assumed air cover was impossible. Each defeat compounded the problem. Pilots returned with stories of futility, of bullets that seemed ineffective, and turns that could not be matched. The Zero became a psychological weapon as much as a physical one, eroding confidence before combat even began. Yet beneath its dominance, cracks existed. Some American pilots noticed that the Zero burned easily when hit. Others observed that it struggled at high speeds and steep dives. These details were small, almost academic, but they hinted at a truth Japan did not want exposed. Back in the United States, intelligence officers gathered fragments of information from combat reports, wreckage, and intercepted communications. Engineers and tacticians studied every detail, searching for patterns. The goal was not to copy the Zero, but to understand it. American doctrine began to shift. Survival depended on discipline, teamwork, and energy management, not individual heroics. Pilots were trained to fight smart, not fair, exploiting speed and altitude instead of turning radius. The Zero still ruled the sky, but the illusion of invincibility was weakening. Somewhere ahead, a turning point was forming, one that would redefine air combat and begin the slow collapse of Japanese air superiority. The turning point did not begin with a new aircraft or a dramatic victory. It began with discipline and restraint. American pilots were ordered to abandon instinctive dogfighting and trust structured tactics designed to keep them alive. One of the most effective was the Thatch Weave, a maneuver that turned mutual support into a weapon. Developed by Navy pilot John S. Thatch, the tactic allowed two fighters to protect each other by crossing paths and forcing a Zero attacker into a vulnerable position. It was not elegant, but it worked. For the first time, American pilots had a reliable answer to the Zero's turning advantage. At the same time, engineers pushed American aircraft to fight on their own terms. Fighters like the F6F Hellcat were rugged, heavily armed, and capable of absorbing punishment the Zero could not. Pilots were instructed to dive away from combat using speed and gravity as shields. The message was clear: America would not try to outturn the Zero. It would outthink it. Then, in June 1942, fate intervened. On the foggy Aleutian island of Akutan, a damaged Zero made a forced landing. The aircraft was captured nearly intact, an intelligence gift of incalculable value. For the first time, the enemy's most feared weapon could be studied in full. Engineers tore it apart. They confirmed everything pilots had suspected. The Zero lacked armor. Its fuel tanks were vulnerable. At high speeds, its controls stiffened dangerously. The myth collapsed under technical scrutiny. With this knowledge, American doctrine hardened. Pilots were trained to exploit speed, altitude, and firepower. Engagements became deliberate, calculated, and ruthless. The Zero was no longer an enigma. It was a machine with limits. The sky had not yet changed hands, but the foundation of Japanese dominance was cracking, and waiting in American factories was an aircraft built specifically to finish the job. While pilots refined tactics in the sky, American engineers were building something entirely new on the ground. Grumman aircraft understood the lesson of the early Pacific War with brutal clarity. Survival came first. Power, durability, and firepower would define the next generation of American fighters. The result was the F6F Hellcat. From its first sketches, it was designed to kill the Zero. It carried a massive engine, thick armor plating, self-sealing fuel tanks, and 6.50 caliber machine guns. It was heavier, faster in a dive, and built to bring pilots home alive. Unlike the Zero, the Hellcat could absorb damage and keep fighting. It could take hits that would have destroyed Japanese fighters instantly. This resilience changed pilot behavior. American aviators could commit to attacks knowing their aircraft gave them a margin for survival. The Hellcat entered service in 1943, and the impact was immediate. Pilots trained to fight using altitude and speed, striking from above and disengaging at will. The Zero's agility mattered less when it could not force its enemy into a turning fight. As 1944 approached, American pilots no longer entered combat hoping to survive. They entered expecting to win. The Hellcat, combined with refined tactics, transformed air battles from chaotic encounters into controlled executions of doctrine. Speed, altitude, and teamwork dictated every move. American pilots attacked from above, diving with overwhelming force. They fired in short, lethal bursts, then climbed away before the Zero could respond. The tactic became known as boom and zoom, and it exploited everything the Zero lacked. The Japanese fighter could not follow in a steep dive, nor recover quickly enough to retaliate. The results were devastating. Japanese formations were shattered before they could react. Experienced pilots were lost at a rate Japan could not replace. Training programs rushed replacements into combat with minimal preparation, widening the skill gap with every engagement. Carrier operations magnified the imbalance. American task forces operated with layered defenses, radar control, and coordinated fighter direction. Pilots were guided toward the enemy with precision. Japanese aviators often flew blind, relying on visual detection alone. Confidence surged through American squadrons. Combat reports shifted in tone, describing methodical victories instead of desperate escapes. The Zero, once feared, was now predictable. Its weaknesses were exploited without mercy. By mid-1944, the outcome was no longer in doubt. The sky belonged increasingly to the United States. What remained was a final, overwhelming confrontation that would erase any illusion of Japanese air parity. That moment was approaching fast, and it would be remembered as one of the most decisive air battles in history. In June 1944, the skies over the Philippine Sea became the proving ground for everything America had learned. The Battle of the Philippine Sea was not just another engagement. It was the final test of Japanese naval aviation against a fully evolved American air machine. Japanese commanders committed their remaining carrier air power in a desperate attempt to halt the American advance. Hundreds of aircraft were launched, many flown by inexperienced pilots trained in weeks rather than years. They flew toward an enemy that now controlled radar, coordination, and the tempo of battle. American carriers launched waves of Hellcats guided by radar and fighter directors. Pilots climbed to altitude, formed disciplined formations, and waited. When Japanese aircraft appeared, they were met by organized resistance at every level of the sky. What followed became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. American pilots cut through incoming formations with devastating efficiency. Japanese aircraft were destroyed in such numbers that some pilots reported running out of targets before ammunition. The Zero, once the terror of the Pacific, was helpless. Its pilots lacked training. Its airframes could not withstand concentrated fire. Attempts to turn or evade only exposed them further. The battle was one-sided, decisive, and irreversible. By the end of the engagement, Japan had lost hundreds of aircraft and most of its remaining experienced naval aviators. American losses were minimal by comparison. Japanese carrier aviation never recovered. The sky over the Pacific was no longer contested. It was controlled. After the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the outcome of aerial warfare in the Pacific was no longer a question. American air superiority was absolute. The Zero, once a symbol of dominance, had become a relic of an outdated philosophy that could not survive modern industrial warfare. The victory was not built on a single aircraft or battle. It was the product of adaptation, intelligence, and an industrial system capable of learning faster than its enemy. American engineers listened to pilots. Commanders adjusted doctrine. Factories responded at a scale no nation could match. Equally decisive was the American approach to training. Pilots were not rushed into combat unprepared. They were taught discipline, teamwork, and survival. Each mission was a lesson carried forward, strengthening the force as a whole. Japanese aviation, by contrast, was hollowed out. Experienced pilots were gone, aircraft production lagged, and doctrine failed to evolve. Courage remained, but courage alone could not close the gap created by American innovation and coordination. By war's end, the United States had redefined air combat. Speed, altitude, radar control, and overwhelming firepower became the standard. The lessons learned over the Pacific shaped every future generation of American fighters. The fall of the Zero marked more than a tactical victory. It symbolized the triumph of adaptability over arrogance, preparation over myth, and collective strength over individual skill alone. In reclaiming the sky, America proved something enduring. When challenged, it learns, it builds, and it overcomes. The legacy of those pilots lives on every time American aircraft rise to defend the skies, carrying with them the hard-earned lessons of history and the unbroken spirit of American air power.